Hey guys, it's Lewpac here with another Albion Online video for you. And today we're going to talk about the announcement of the Merlyn expansion for Albion. A few features have been revealed. While we don't have the full expansion notes just yet, a few features have been revealed by the development team. And there's some quite interesting stuff in there that we're going to discuss today and explain what it means to you as players. Just to preface this, I just wanted to say how insane it is to be getting this straight after an awesome Lancelot mid-season patch off the back of a crazy Lancelot patch as well. Both of these patches were huge for the game, and honestly, since the launch, the content has been coming thick and fast. Now, anyone who watches my stream knows that I've always felt that Albion Online was a great bare bones game when it launched, but it was very basic and lacked a lot of features and content that it should have had, which possibly affected player retention a little bit in the early days. But now, since the launch of the game, the expansion patches, Kay, Joseph, Lancelot, and now Merlyn, they've been coming at a very steady pace. They've contained really good, positive changes for the game, variety in content, a new gathering profession, the new hardcore expeditions, GVG, scrimming, arenas. Stuff is being added to the game at a great rate, and it really gives me a lot of faith in Albion as a long-term game to play, not just a flash in the pan as we approach the 1-year anniversary of the game. This ties in nicely with this week's Steam launch of Albion, and I think will give the new players a much better experience. But on to the notes that we've been given for the new content update, Merlyn. Now, there's a lot of stuff in here, and we're just going to go through it bit by bit. The first major focus of the Merlyn update is the Royal Continent and its economy. It's no secret to any Albion veteran that although the Royal outer cities were very, very busy and very fun to live out of early on in the game when it launched, as time grew, everybody just moved to Carlion. Carlion became the hub for everything. Even people's outland plots weren't being used because it was just better to live in Carlion. If anyone ever asks me about personal islands, I say make sure it's in Carlion. Where's the best place to buy and sell? Carlion. Where should I own a plot? Carlion. You know, where can you go for everything you need in Albion Online? Carlion is the answer. And as such, the 5 sub-cities in the Royal Continent have kind of died out. There's usually around 30 to 40 people there at any given time, compared to an average of 800 to 1,000 over in Carlion most of the time. So a big focus point of the Merlyn patch is trying to get those cities populated again. And what it says is they're going to be boosting, refining, and making each royal city the best place for the mid-tier resources of their type. So, for example, Bridgewatch would be the city for leather, Fort Sterling would be the city for ore. When they say the mid-tier resources being the best place in the game for them, I think they probably mean tier 4 to 6, maybe 4 to 5, I'm not sure. But this means the enchant rates around the particular cities are going to surpass even that of Mercia. They say the best place in the world to gather them. So that would mean that it's going to be hugely contested for that mid-tier, and also it's going to create localization of the resources. So lots of leather is going to flow out of Bridgewatch into the rest of the world, and it opens up things like merchanting again that we saw when the game launched and was very overpopulated. Merchants were running things from one biome to another, making good profit, but that all died out as everything ended up flowing centrally to Carlion. Now we're going to see a surplus of certain resources in certain regions, and transporting it is going to be much more attractive once again. On top of these economy changes, they're going to be improving the marketplace interface as well, making it much easier to trade, and in particular to manage buy and sell orders for more effective trade. So that just sounds like a tidying up and simplifying of the UI. You know, quality of life features for the marketplace, which anybody that uses the marketplace, you're definitely going to know what they're talking about there and what you'd like to see to make your experience easier. They also state in these notes that each of the outer cities is going to have a special bonus for crafting certain types of gear. Carlion won't have these specializations, so In theory, gear that's coming out of the royal cities will actually surpass gear that's made in Carlion if it is of the correct type. So what I imagine is gear that uses a lot of metal will have a bonus to craft in Fort Sterling. We don't know what those bonuses are, whether those are special extra stats, whether it's just higher quality stuff. We're not sure what the bonuses are, but hopefully they will be substantial enough that it means people are actually going to be doing the crafting in the relevant city. As well as crafting, refining and gathering around the royal cities, they wanted to introduce a PvP side to all of this as well. And there's a new feature they're calling faction warfare. And this is completely independent of guild and alliance politics. Faction politics is going to be a subsystem that people can engage in, and it is completely optional. So each of the 5 cities is going to have its own faction. You have the option to ally with one of the faction, at which point every single player of opposing factions will be hostile to you no matter where you are. Now this is a big deal. Obviously, if you've seen my maps video or played the game, you know that there's blue, yellow, red and black zones. Red and black being full loot PvP, yellow being knockdown, blue being no PvP at all. That said, in faction warfare, hostiles will be hostiles no matter where you are. So opposing faction members can be killed and looted in blue and yellow zones. Fear not there if you're a newer player or not a PvP focused player. Faction warfare is completely optional. If you do not opt into faction warfare, you won't be attacked by ravaging hordes of the opposing faction, stuff like that. If you stay out of the faction warfare, it makes absolutely no difference to your normal gameplay. So blue zones are still safe, yellow zones are still knocked down. That said, it's going to be quite funny if you're chilling in a blue zone, just gathering a few stones to upgrade your house, minding your own business, and all of a sudden 2 rival factions turn up and start kicking the granny out of each other right in front of you. You're like, what on earth is going on here? You could always dive in and grab some loot there if you see people go down. I'm not sure if that will work as part of faction warfare, but it could be quite funny to see it kicking off in the blue zones where usually no PvP happens. Now, the reward for being part of a faction is obviously you earn faction points for doing stuff that your faction likes. Probably namely killing members of the opposing faction. We only know a little bit so far, but it says faction points will be able to exchange for special resources and mounts. The resources will be used in particular for crafting special bags and capes. It doesn't sound that exciting until they say the faction capes will be unlike the current capes in the game. They will have meaningful stats and passive abilities that influence gameplay. This is going to turn capes into a proper active item slot. Not just an afterthought. You think, oh, I need to get a cape to go with my gear set. Cape choice will become relevant in the meta. This is going to be a huge deal because each faction will probably have different capes. So if you're part of one faction, you're going to need to buy faction capes and faction resources of the other factions if that's what you need for your build. How it's going to work with guilds and alliances, maybe the alliances are going to say, right, we're all going to go one faction. Maybe they're even going to spread across different factions so that they can get a steady supply of all of the factions' special resources for crafting. I'm not sure, but we don't know enough to make that call yet. We don't know exactly what the capes are going to do. Until that information comes out, we can't really make a call on that. I'm sure once Merlyn goes live or once we know the notes, we'll have a much better idea of how it plays out in reality. Also, as part of faction warfare, you're going to be able to raid and conquer opposing factions' outposts for special rewards. You could do trade runs for your faction for rewards, but you will have to venture into opposing faction territories and get back alive, otherwise your goods are lost. So all of these seem like other ways you can earn faction points, but once again, to reiterate, you do not have to take part in faction warfare if you're not a PvP player. One of the great things about Albion is you're not forced into full loot PvP if you don't want to be. until you want to reach the higher end of resources in the game. You know, if you want to max at tier 6 or 5 and just keep it nice and safe for a while until you've got enough money to sustain yourself in the full loot environment, you don't have to PvP anyone. And that's one of the reasons where Albion as a full loot sandbox is actually more friendly for new players. Talking about existing features in the game, there's a few changes for GVG Season 3. And these are actually hopefully coming before the Merlyn update, it says. So one of the big problems they see is snowballing in the Outlands, which is where the big powerful guilds with lots of money and lots of territory, they just get more and more powerful because they're making more money, which means they can equip their guys with better gear, which means their guys are winning more fights, which brings them even more gear and more money and more territories and more energy. And eventually they're like the dragon in The Hobbit, who's just sitting on a huge pile of treasure and nobody else has anything and they just can't be touched. And it is a bit of a problem. Skill of your GVG teams and your players definitely factors into it, but having a huge economical advantage is both a gameplay and a psychological effect in guild warfare. So they're going to be rebalancing the energy amount siphoned from territories, making it a little bit more evenly spread from Anglia across to Mercia. They've already made it so raiding mages is better to encourage stealing the energy and denying those guilds their stuff. And finally, there's going to be a GVG cap on the gear used in the Royal Continent. So no longer will you be running into 8-1 and even 8-2 teams in the Royal Continent, which I think is absolutely ridiculous when you've got guys in 8.2 defending a territory that doesn't even generate tier 8 resources. They're just doing it because they can and because they want to beat some people up, not because it's cost effective. A new feature that they're planning to introduce with Season 3 as well is the item overcharge feature. Now this is quite a complex mechanic and there's a lot of theory and reasoning behind it. In all honesty, I think it's such a complicated feature that it's probably going to get its own video based on some more stuff that we're going to be knowing in the near future. For now though, I'll just give you the baseline of what overcharging does. Overcharging is a way of boosting your items by 1 tier instantly. However, after 30 minutes of overcharging, they have a chance of breaking and being completely destroyed. The idea is if you're undergeared and your back's against the wall, you and your team can overcharge your gear and try and fight against the odds against a better geared or more powerful team, based on the concept that you are likely to die anyway, so overcharging isn't that big of a risk. Now, a lot of people are saying, but what about the high-end teams who are going to get 8-2 gear and they're just going to overcharge it and stomp everyone? I honestly don't think it's going to be a problem because an 8-2 team facing an 8-1 team is not going to risk a trash rate on their gear just to beat the other team even harder. It's not cost-effective. Even if you got 7 kills in a GVG to 0 deaths, but 15% of your 8.2 gear trashed, you'd probably make a loss. So this is more a feature that's going to be designed for the lower end of guilds and the up-and-coming players to overcharge their cheap gear at the cost of risking some of it to try and fight more powerful enemies. Again, once we know more details and we have more info on what's coming, then we'll be able to make a call a bit better on how the feature is going to be used, who's going to be the people that benefit the most from it. But the concept of the idea and the reasoning for the idea is sound. I think it's just very important that they make sure that it does benefit the low end of players. It doesn't actually just end up making the top end of players more powerful. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on all of these up and coming features and the patch. So don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment below if you want to discuss the patch or you have any ideas or thoughts on future videos. Right, thank you for watching guys, and I'll see you soon.